more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Well, welcome back to the Sense of Beer Style podcast. Hey, Julia, how are you doing?
It's great to see you, Jeremy. I'm so excited. We've made it to a exciting group of styles for sure.
Yeah, we're getting into stouts, and so first I have a little bit of story, but first a little admittance. I don't normally reach for a stout when I'm thirsty for a beer. It's usually, I'll be honest, one of the last ones on my list. Why? Because I don't love that burnt, acrid flavor, generally speaking. So I need something to balance that out for me. However, we're talking about sweet stouts today, which totally takes care of that problem for me. And with sweet stouts, really, we're still talking about the British beers, the British dark beers. And when we talk about a sweet stout, in all reality, it could be a stout sweetened by any means. It could have oatmeal in it. We'll talk about in another Stylecast. It could be sweetened with. I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at my notes. It could be under attenuated. It could be sweetened with something like lactose or milk sugar, and that's really what. So a sweet stout is kind of generic term, but for this style, we are really zoning in on that stout that has been back sweetened with milk sugar or lactose, and so that makes it. That just takes all those rough, acrid, bitter edges and just smooths them over and makes it just a really wonderful beer to drink. So that is the sweet stout, and I'm gonna pour my beer and let you talk about all the wonderful ingredients that go into this.
Great. And it's a good setup, and there's a lot of history here, and it does weave in and out the style of sweet stout compared to oatmeal stout. A lot of also origins back to the UK and England. However, that history still goes on, right? I think you have American craft brewers putting their own twist, and world brewers all over putting their twist. And you've seen many of these sweet stouts over the years also in advertising as a healthful, almost, except beverage alcohol in the United States, you're not supposed to claim it's healthful. You've got advertisements that are trying to tell you it's helpful, and pregnant women drinking sweet stouts because it will give you, a boost. And this lactose milk sugar kind of component was capitalized on over the years to really showcase the fact that I know I'm going to go there, Jeremy, that women produce milk, by golly. And the fact is that
the advertisements from the previous century were all about that. Was just all about this is good for mother and child. It was it was incredible what kind of ads were allowed back in those days.
That's absolutely my point in bringing it up, is this healthful component in the early days of at least this style coming of age. And now you don't hear or see that as much. But you do want to talk about in characteristic ingredients that lactose or milk sugar. So lactose or milk sugar is sugar that is contained in dairy, right? Cow's milk. And it is the type of sugar that is not fermentable by ale yeast. Ale yeast is the yeast that is used for these sweet stouts. They're basically sweet stout ales. And so the yeast doesn't eat that sugar. So you've got this base note of mouthfeel that comes to the table from the lactose. And you've also got a residual sugar where some of these beers are finishing certainly more sweeter based on the style guidelines. So when you think sweet stout, it's because of that lactose milk sugar that is not fermentable. And so I think that's a really good one to lead with when talking about ingredients. And then the base of any beer obviously is the malt, right? So a base of pale malted barley is what we're dealing with, but you've got dark malted and grains, as the style guidelines will point out. that really bring to the table more than an essence of color, certainly a lot for the flavor. And we'll talk about that as we dive into the style. And some sugar adjuncts beyond lactose is also often used. But that's kind of it. It's actually a pretty simple style if you look at the ingredients, besides the adjuncts of the lactose and other sugar ingredients additions. So
Yeah.
there you have it. And now maybe you poured one in your glass. Let's talk about what it looks like.
Well, and just one other quick thing to add, other names for this, it's a sweet stout, a milk stout, a cream stout. These are all basically the same beer. And one other little point, just a little asterisk that I just thought of while you were talking, is that this is, I can't mentally go down the list in the moment, but this is a beer that all beers are vegetarian. They're all made from plant material. However, because there's lactose in this, vegans beware. If you're a true vegan and you don't want any dairy products, then don't drink this beer because there's dairy product in there. Just not going to lie. But that being said, so let's take a look at this beer. According to the guidelines, it should be dark brown to black. If I hold this up in the light, I am getting some of those garnet highlights. They say it could be clear, it could be opaque. It's hard to tell with such a dark beer. If you really want to get nerdy, then I would pour it into a little thin tube or hydrometer flask to really see how clear it is. But that's unnecessary unless you're trying to go to that nth degree. There should be this creamy tan head on the top. The head on my beer that I just poured has not persisted. Maybe I poured it a little too gently because I am hovering above my computer and I'm being a little careful. But there still is foam there and is this beautiful tan color. But I do expect there to be a pretty good head on this beer if poured properly. But now, while I smell this beer, will you tell us what I'm smelling?
Sure, I will. And again, we're baselining on the Beer Judge Certification Program 2021 guidelines. That's what you and I, Jeremy, as Sense of Beer Style show hosts follow. And yet they simplify things, right? They could go on and on, pages and books, frankly, on one aspect of a beer. But the aroma really narrows it down to you get a mild essence of roasted grains, right? And grains, malted barley, which is the pale malt that we referenced in the ingredients, and roasted barley. That barley should not be too aggressive, right? Mild essence of roasted, higher temperatured roasted malts over just kilned pale malts. So you're going to get a low level sense of coffee or chocolate notes, and a spectrum of that. The style guidelines also talk about, in a nitpicky way to me, something that I would rewrite if I was writing these style guidelines. It says an impression of cream-like sweetness often exists. Well, sweetness is a basic taste. You can't smell sweetness, but you are going maybe to get an indication that this beer has some girth and some residual sugar from the aroma. And I totally get that, having had many of examples of this style. We've also got fruitiness from our ale yeast that will produce low-level esters, which are a yeast byproduct. Fruitiness can be anything from unripe, red fruits or stone fruits, or more advanced fruit flavors, but should be low to moderate. And then low diacetyl. Low diacetyl in the aroma, that's something that is optional. Diacetyl is going to be another yeast byproduct and does often come from ale yeast. It's low-level butter, not all the way to advanced butter popcorn or butterscotch. If you get that, no way. And it's often not in most examples that I come across. And then low floral or earthy hop aroma is optional. Floral and earthy hops definitely indicate English UK style hops. That's the aspect of hops that are produced from that region, but often not really a predominant aspect of the aroma or the flavor. And speaking of flavor, what are you tasting?
Well, so this one is so I'm cheating a little bit. I'm going to give a little shout out to one of the most beautiful breweries one could ever go visit, right there in Pacific City in Oregon, right on the beach. This huge sand dune, huge haystack rock out there. Great surfing, great spearfishing. But this one is from Pelican Brewing. But this,
Nice.
and the reason why I bring this up, it's not a shameful plug. It's shameless plug because this one is White Russian inspired. So there's some extra flavors in here that are not typical. It's absolutely wonderful. But having a taste of Kahlua in your beer is not typical. But what should you taste in this particular beer? First of all, it's a stout. It should be dark. It should be roasted. It can be assertively roasted. It could be aggressively roasted. It can have some of those acrid flavors in there. We're talking dark coffee, chocolate, and however that manifests I think of espresso, I think of cafe au lait, I think of that old pot sitting in the diner on the burner for 2 hours. These are all different flavors of coffee, but they're very different. I think about the chocolate, whether it's milk or semi-sweet or dark Belgian. These all can be flavors that can come through in this beer depending on the ingredients. And same thing with the aroma. You have this low, it could be none, or it could be up to a low kind of floral, earthy hop flavor with a medium hop bitterness. And that combined with that roastiness can come across as a bit bitter, maybe a touch harsh. It shouldn't be harsh, but it could be perceived as such. But that's where you have this medium to high sweetness from this lactose, from that milk sugar that comes through. And anything that's rough, anything that's pokey, any of those flavors that just stick out and just want to cause a problem, it just washes over and smooths everything out. You still taste those flavors, but it makes them more lovely. It makes them more elegant. And it just makes them, cherishable. And that sweetness, because there is a sweetness in there, it lasts long into the finish. So this beer should last on your palate for a while, just like drinking cream. You can have a low to medium esters of those fruity flavors that you were talking about, and then of course diacetyl can sometimes creep itself in there. Totally fine as long as it's low. It doesn't have to be there, but it is kind of charming in a style like this as well. But that is the flavor, the basic flavor of a sweet stout. Let's talk about next on my list is the mouthfeel. There's a wonderful mouthfeel to this.
Yeah, and just nice to listen as you talk about the flavor and kind of elicit what we would be drinking. We hope you're drinking one right now, and if not, listen to the show, finish to the end, and then go get yourself one and drink it along again and listen to the show, because that's the fun of this, is to really calibrate. Mouthfeel is a definite component of flavor, right? And so mouthfeel is pretty easy to guess in terms of the body. Medium full to full bodied, but not heavy, dense, cloying, so your mouth's watering type of mouthfeel. Yet creamy, right? There's an essence of creaminess, especially from that lactose milk sugar. Low to moderate carbonation, right? This beer is not going to be prickly. It's not going to dry out your mouth when you taste it. It's definitely going to linger on the tongue and the palate. And then you've got, that higher residual sugar from unfermentable sugars that give you a fuller mouthfeel. I mean, that's the essence of what the mouthfeel is all about. And with that, comparing this to other styles, I think is really, really helpful to ground us. So take us through that, Jeremy.
So when I think about an American stout that is going to be a little bit more bitter because of the hops, or a British stout that will have less hop bitterness, but it can be just very roasty. This is that beer, but sweeter, and therefore it like I say, it just kind of it just covers up some of those rough edges. The flavors are still there, but you have a sweetness that just kind of gives you this rosy colored sunglass look on the world that just makes everything better. This beer can be compared to an oatmeal stout that we'll talk about in a different style cast. It is very similar, but this will end up being more sweet, or sweeter, I should say, because there is a milk sugar in there. But you have a similar texture, a similar slickness to the palate. Another one that this is similar to would be one of my favorites. Hard to find. I can't wait to talk about this one. Is the tropical stout. That is again a stout, but it was done differently with different ingredients and more sweetness, more malt, easier to drink, especially in a hot tropical climate. That's where this really kind of within the stout family, the sweet stout really hangs out with the oatmeal stout and the tropical stout as BFFs, and just kind of holds down the fort on that sweeter end of that spectrum.
I like it.
Yeah. Let's talk about the commercial examples.
Commercial examples. This is a great one where in your beer studies, you will definitely see, if you're states bound, United States, a lot of the specialty imports showcasing in the style guidelines front and center. You've got, also though, some US examples, and I think other countries are really coming along. Marston's Pearl Jet Stout is listed readily. You've got Bristol Beer Factory Milk Stout. Firestone Walker from the U.S. Nitro Merlin Milk Stout, which is a reliable, great example. And then Left Hand Milk Stout is listed in BJCP style guidelines as a commercial example for sweet stout, although I will tell you, in 2022 at the Great American Beer Festival, Left Hand won a silver medal for oatmeal stout. So that just goes to show you that I like your brother and sister kind of analogy with the styles, Jeremy, that the commercial examples, when you're tasting them, can elicit potentially other styles, but these are definitely ones to calibrate with. And you can also homebrew your own, which is always a great one to remember, right? Like that's the aspect of brewing and tasting, is you can still brew your own to really see if you could nail one of those. And if you're going to try to brew this or identify it blind, what vital statistics are we looking for in terms of sweet stout?
Well, this one was neat. When studying all the numbers for the advanced Cicerone test, this one really lined up well for me. The sweet stout was memorable and noteworthy because, as far as the ABV goes, with my personal rule of twos, that 4% to the 6% is just dead on average, and the sweet stout was 4 to 6. It was dead on average per the numbers. IBUs kind of same thing. Went from 20, where it's there for balance, to 40, where it's just starting to get detectable, and so it really holds that perfectly well. The color, it's exactly what you think it would be, from a dark brown all the way to black. So the SRM is 30 to 40. You don't have to necessarily memorize that. You can just intuit that this beer is dark, so therefore 30 to 40 makes sense. If you're looking at the EBC or European Brewery Convention, you can effectively double that, and we're talking 60 to 80. It's real simple. When we get to gravities, for those of us who work in gravities, and I prefer to work in gravities, that's how I learned it. It falls in line with the ABV. So we're talking 1044 to 1060. So right in that same range. And a final gravity, and this is where I think that's really interesting, because we're talking about that the body and that milk sugar that doesn't ferment. Then we end up with the final gravity of 1012 all the way up to 1024. So there's a lot of residual sugar in this beer. There's a lot of body left over in this beer. If you're someone who works with Play-Doh, the original Play-Doh can be 11 to 15, and the final Play-Doh can be 3 to 6. So we're still talking about that. And and just talking about ABVs in terms of Play-Doh, we're looking at 8 to 9. So for those of you who work in Play-Doh, hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. But basically, this is not a strong beer. It's an average beer versus strength, and it finishes with a lot of body. So those are the numbers that I expect to find in this beer style. But let's talk about,
Jeremy, I'm going to reinforce before you kind of toss me the baton that it's a real important note, because dark does not equate to alcohol level.
No,
right?
Not at all.
Dark comes from the heat exposed to the malted barley or grains that then enhances flavor development, mouthfeel, and color. It has nothing to do with the actual alcohol level.
Absolutely. And an Irish stout is a good example of that, where at 4.5%, it's one of the darker beers on the list, but it's sessionable. It is truly sessionable.
Yeah.
But now here's the baton. Let's talk about the type of glassware and the temperature that you would want to drink this beer.
Great. So caught the baton, yes, and holding it up in the air, declaring that I'm wanting these beers because they're lower carbonation, right? Not more aggressive, and they have so much flavor to showcase. If you want it a little more palatable and just like quick for refreshment, sure, serve these beers cold. cold in American Lagerland is 38 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you want to get to more cellar temperatures, right, 50 up to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 Celsius, then try it differently. So do one thing when you taste these beers. A, you probably bought more than one. So drink one cold out of the fridge at that, refrigerator temperature, and then take that second one out at the same time. By the time you're done drinking that first one, that second one is risen. And then as you pour that second one into the glass, it's going to continue to rise in temperature. And I guarantee you're going to have a more nuanced experience with that second beer because you're drinking it at a higher temperature. And then the no-nick pint, right? We talk about the no-nick pint a lot in the shows when there's Jeremy, if you're watching us, although if you're listening, you're not missing out. You've seen these in bars and restaurants. It's the pint glass that English bars are famous for using, and it's really perfect because you can hold your hand around it. It helps warm the beer up. They're stackable and chipless, but there's a really nice bulb and bump towards the top of the glass that I really like because you are less apt to drop the glass. It's almost like a holder, but no handle. And so, yeah, a no-nick pint is perfect for this glass. I would do it no less than giving it to you in that type of glassware.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm currently drinking this out of a dimpled pub mug right now, and it's perfect.
Yeah, and so Jeremy, you have your dimpled pub mug. More power to you. Definitely in the vein of a fun one, but I love holding that glass and warming up the beer and putting my hand around the glass to do that. So that's where I land, and I'm sticking to it. That said, though, no matter what glass it's in, I want to have this beer often with food because there's so much to get to know in the flavor and so many synergies and hooks to work with in food. So what would you pair it with?
So I had with something like this. To me, it's just like a candy bar with espresso in a glass, and it's just wonderful. So a dessert would be wonderful. A fruit tart to contrast this chocolatey and creamy flavor that I'm going would be just wonderful. But I have to tell you, Julia, you are the queen of food pairing, so I think you'll appreciate this. I had a moment one day when I was tasting a cream stout or milk stout, sweet stout, and we were trying to find a pairing for it. And we were at this place that did their own, for lack of better words, craft charcuterie, and we grabbed a bite of their handmade pastrami and tasted this, and both of us looked up and locked eyes at the same time. The guy who made the meat and I had the beer, and we both looked up and thought, "Oh my God!" The clouds parted and the angels sang for both of us at the same moment, and we
That's
knew
awesome.
that was a match made in heaven. So get yourself some pastrami, get yourself a Reuben sandwich, and eat that with this beer, and it should rock your world.
Well, and the reason I see the pastrami working with a milk stout is because, if you think of the richness and denseness of pastrami, this beer isn't going to barrel it over, but it can stand up to it. And then most pastrami has that beautiful pepper, that black pepper edge and crust to it. And black pepper works very well with what's going to elicit the flavors of this beer of like darker chocolates, right? Certainly towards roasted coffee. Think about putting dark black pepper in the mix there, and it fits. There's synergy there. So I totally see that as working together.
Yeah, it was magical. But I also tried this with like an Italian buffalo cheese, so that the creaminess kind of worked together and kind of put itself on the side. So you had this wonderful, slightly earthy kind of flavor with the beer, and everything just worked wonderfully. This is a great beer for anything spicy as well because it will tame that spice, so you just taste the flavor, but it doesn't destroy your palate. This is such a wonderful beer to eat food with.
I would agree. Moles and the like. Yeah, really great places. And then lots of dessert options. The cheat when you talk any stout is people steer you to chocolate cake, right? Although I don't think it's a terrible cheat. I just encourage you to go further, but I also encourage you to try any of the stouts in the beer style guidelines with chocolate cake. And there's so many different types of chocolate cakes. Flourless chocolate cake is one example where it's more dense, less pillowy, that I think works really well with sweet stouts. You also can try this in a float, right, with chocolate ice cream and pour some sweet stout over that in a glass and get a spoon and go to town. So I don't think you should shy away from it. I just don't think it's the only pairing that I want to hear people talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, I find the cancellation effect is most prominent for me with a stout and a chocolate dessert. So that's not a slam dunk for me. It can be a little bit tricky. So just caution on that. But otherwise, have fun.
What Jeremy's saying is that like comes like. That's that cancellation that you mentioned, Jeremy. And so for people's edification, that is, if something is like flavor to in the beer or beverage to the food, they can almost sometimes cancel or negate each other instead of elevate and accentuate each other. But experiment. No rule is confirmed and definitive. Definitely, I would say experiment. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up because we've even got other shows to get to. And so go forth, drink your sweet stout, let us know how it's going, and please study your style guidelines, sit to judge these beers, test in to be a Cicerone, do all those things, put more stouts on your menu if you're a bar manager listening to us, or if you're a home brewer, please start brewing more of these styles.
Cheers to that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
And me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.